But this morning we have a very important conversation. A conversation about us. A conversation about how deprived many of our communities are. The basic things to life lacking in those communities. This morning we're having a conversation about 7.3 million Ghanaians being multidimensionally poor. I know that many of you have asked the question, what does that mean? Well, we've been trying to read what the Ghana Statistical Service says it means to you. But this morning we are privileged to be joined by the Government Statistician, Professor Kwabena Annim, who will be telling us more about that report, why it's important, and the role that report can play in our quest for development as a country. Prof, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
I believe you're doing very well.
Very well. Thank you very much.
We thank God for life. So let's get into it and let's find out, first of all, for those who are asking the question, multidimensionally poor, what's that all about?
So as you rightly said, we've approached the discussion on poverty from the basic needs approach. Why this is important is that it would arm government to be very specific with its interventions. So anytime we do the Ghana Living Standards Survey, we compute what we call monetary poverty, which simply looks at expenditure levels of people based on the expected calorie intake, and once you don't spend up to that level, we declare that this person is either poor or extremely poor or non-poor. But moving forward, since the 2010 population and housing census, we started computing the multidimensionally poor, which will look at it from different perspectives, as I indicated, the basic needs approach. The computation has evolved over time. From the 2021 population housing census, we focused on 4 dimensions, i.e. living conditions, health, education, and employment. So these are the 4 broad dimensions. And for each of these dimensions, we identified indicators within them. So for instance, within the living conditions dimension, we had 7 indicators. Within the education dimension, we had 3 indicators. Within the health dimension, we had 2 indicators. And employment, we had just 1 indicator. So from a dimension perspective, we have 4 dimensions. And from an indicator perspective, we have 13 indicators. So as I indicated, we identify households that are deprived across these 13 indicators, so that we tell policymakers that if you want to be very specific in ensuring that we address a particular challenge, you know exactly what to do. Let me speak to the space of education, and I'm happy to speak to all the other dimensions. Sure. Within education, we have 3 indicators. One is what we are calling the school lag. All of us are expected to be at a certain grade at any point in time. So if we go into a household and we identify somebody in the household who is 2 years behind the expected grade, then we are saying that the household is experiencing a school lag, because somebody there who is supposed to be in class 6 is maybe in class 3. So going forward, if you see that phenomena predominantly in a particular geographical area, then government would know the specific intervention that it has to pursue. Another indicator within the school dimension has to do with what we call the school attainment. We all expect that if you are 15 years and older, you should have done at least 9 years of education. So if you are 15 years and older, you are in a household and you've not done 9 years of education, then definitely there is a challenge as far as your school indicator is concerned. Then the third dimension is what we call the school attendance, which we all know what it is in terms of looking at whether children in the household are attending school as expected or not. So for each of the 4 dimensions, we have provided specific indicators that will guide government to say that if I really want to address poverty, this is how I want to do it. If you don't mind, let me go into the computation.
Please go ahead.
So across these 13 indicators, what we do is we look at...
but before you go into the computation, let's just look at the living conditions bit also. What are the indicators in there?
So it cuts across, starting from water in terms of whether you have access to improved water. It cuts across issues around toilet, whether the household has its own toilet. It goes into issues of cooking fuel, whether you are using the hard fuel, that is charcoal, and so on. Whether there is congestion in the room, you have more than 3 people sleeping in the room, the type of materials that have been used in the construction of the house. So these are the indicators that goes into the living conditions dimension. Once we've talked about living conditions and education, let's quickly talk about health and employment. So health, we have 2 indicators there. health insurance and the experience of mortality within the household. It is important we understand how we measure health insurance. Health insurance could simply mean whether you have the card or not. And it could also mean whether the card is currently active or not. We don't want to focus on whether you've registered or not, because as a country, we've reached close to 100% when it comes to registration. But whether it's active is another conversation in terms of whether people are regularly renewing their insurance card to ensure that at any point in time they can use it is the conversation we should be having. So we focus on the active status of the card rather than whether it's enrolled or not. Then the second dimension is, as I said, whether there has been the occurrence of mortality over the period, that is the last 12 months, from the census data collection. And from the employment perspective, we're looking at whether there is a member in the household who is not employed or is not engaged in an economic activity over the reference period. So these are the 13 indicators that we use for the computation of the multidimensionally poor. From a computation point of view, of these 13 indicators, we say that if you are a third, that is 4, deprived of the 13 indicators, then you are multidimensionally poor. So once you are able to exceed that a third, then we don't classify you are multidimensionally non-poor. So the cutoff for multidimensional poor household is across these 13 indicators. If you are at least a third of the 13 indicators multidimensional, if you are deprived in a third of these 13 indicators, then we call you as multidimensionally poor. And that is what led us to arrive at 24.3% of the population that are multidimensionally poor. Another indicator that we look at when we are computing multidimensional poverty is the intensity of poverty. So once we arrived at a 24.3% that are multidimensionally poor, the next question is to look at across the 13 indicators on the average for those who are poor, what is the number that will represent that average? And we got 43.8%. So the 43.8% is about the 24.3% that are multidimensionally poor, and look at the average, that is the share of the total number of indicators that are poor. So simply we are saying that among the poor, on the average, they are deprived in 6 out of the 13 indicators. Okay. And that is what gives us the conversation around the breadth of poverty, the severity of poverty, because here you are looking at how poor the poor are given the 13 indicators, and on the average, we have 6 of the 13 indicators for those who are multidimensionally poor.
Let's look at the relevance. We'll come back to some of the issues. I know people will be concerned about, if you have more than 3 persons in a room, that's some will say, if you have just a 2-bedroom home and you have a family of 6, of course, you're going to have the rest of the children if the mother and father in one room. But let's look at the relevance of this data. Why is this important?
So we need to look at this from 2 perspectives. One is the policy intervention perspective, and the other is the disaggregated perspective. So from the policy intervention perspective, as I indicated, now if we go to the Ministry of Education, we tell them that let's begin to look at these 3 indicators, not just the siting of schools, but look at whether people are attending school, whether people are at the level where they are expected to be, and whether we have all people 15 years and older doing at least 9 years of education. And in our minds, these are very straightforward interventions that the ministry can pursue going forward. From a disaggregated point of view, the interesting thing is that we've not done this only at the national level, and this is what we keep talking about. The statistics is more relevant at the sub-national level. And when we say the sub-national level, it's not even at the regional level, it's not even at the district level. Now we've provided this information for the top 20 localities in every district. So it's not just MPI for the 16 administrative regions, it's not just MPI for the 261 administrative districts, but we are talking about MPI for more than 5,000 localities in the country. So all that we are expecting the Ministry of Local Government, Decentralization and Rural Development to do is get each district coordinating unit to look at what is happening at the locality level within your district, and first of all ask yourself, what can you do about it? can we begin to have some benchmarks? Why are some districts experiencing 6.3% of multidimensional poverty and others experiencing 68% of multidimensional poverty? So in our mind, if we begin to interrogate this, and what we say is district competitions is what is going to lead to national development. Districts should begin to compare themselves, and within districts, localities should compare themselves. So localities comparing themselves would engender growth at the district level. Districts competing will engender growth at the regional level, and then that will go to the national level. So this is the reason why we've not just done only multidimensional poverty. Indeed, we have other 15 indicators that we've done district ranking for all of them.
Let me just get your thoughts about something, because in talking about all of these things, you've talked about one of the things we say when it comes to decentralization. Competition within the metropolitan areas or the district assemblies will lead to improved, services. But you've also talked about the fact that this is to ensure that beyond the numbers, everything that we say, oh, okay, we've spent this, or, we spent that, you want us to get to the bottom of what the situation really is. Is it your view that development is just not about throwing figures, but the quality of life of people?
Winston, I always say that for every intervention, there is a value chain we all need to think through. So assuming government invests X amount of money in a particular sector and sees the output of it, I don't think that is what all of us are interested in. Ultimately, is the outcomes and the impact. That is what we should be interested in. And I believe that is what you mean by the quality of life.
Yes.
And the only way we can do that is when we do a population-based analysis. So we always say that government can tell us that we've invested X amount in this. What we saw out of this is Y amount. But as to whether that has had an effect on the entire population is the ultimate goal. And that is why we don't use only administrative data in terms of how much we invested in it, the number of outputs that we are seeing. But at the end of the day, generally as a population, what are we seeing in terms of transformation? And this is what we are yet to see as a country in terms of seeing a consistent growth in different dimensions at the population level.
Okay, so let's get into some of the indicators, because, questions that are being asked, for instance. So when we say, okay, if you have 3 or more people in a room, that means there's some level of deprivation. Why the number 3? What's wrong with having more than 3 people in a room?
Let me precede a response to this question with the activity that we held last week, which had to do with a national convening on the dimensions, indicators, and weights that we use for the computing of the multidimensional poverty index. Winston, at that convening, we made it very clear that we should not allow only the National Statistical Service to be determining to be the one determining the statistics that it ought to produce, but this to a large extent should be done in collaboration with the ministries, departments, and agencies that are putting in the interventions. Now, we have gone through this from different perspectives. One is, what are the international standards? And 2, to a large extent, how do we make it context specific? With the question that you asked, we all are aware of the standard room size and the expected number of people in terms of adults that one would expect to be in that room size. And from a standard point of view, the threshold is 2, international. So we have even pushed the boundaries because of our own cultural context and said that let's take into consideration 3 instead of 2. That is why in my earlier submission I indicated that these definitions are evolving over time, and we need to do this in collaboration with the government MDAs. For every indicator that is there at any point in time, we do a national consultation to ensure that at least all of us are in agreement with that definition. So from the perspective of the average number of people that are expected to be in a room, international standards, adults 2. For purposes of this estimation, we pushed it for context reasons. We've pushed it up to 3, on the average 3 people per room.
And I see here too, when it comes to cooking fuel, that a household is deprived if the main source of cooking fuel is firewood or charcoal and the kitchen is indoors.
Again, this is standard from a pollution point of view. If we are going to continue to cook with firewood, we all know the pollution implications. If you are cooking in the same room that you are using for sleeping, we know the implications of it. So the international standard is that you should have a separate room, well enough to ensure that the pollution from the cooking does not have health effects on the people in the household.
Great. This morning we're joined by the Government Statistician, Professor Kwabena Annim. We're having a conversation about the report they release about 7.3 million Ghanaians being multidimensionally poor. And this morning we've been going through the indicators. But let's get to, you've talked about the localities. You've talked about, the districts, the top localities within the districts. Let's look at the top. Let's look at the regions, for instance. Which regions need the most attention?
Winston, thank you for bringing this up, and it helps us distinguish between the use of absolute numbers and the use of percentages. From the 2021 population housing census, we all know that Greater Accra is the most populous, closely followed by Ashanti region. So from an absolute numbers point of view, these are the two regions that for anything that you talk about, you are likely to see the most in there. So from the multidimensional poverty computation, Ashanti region had a multidimensional poverty percentage of 18%, Greater Accra 11%. But when it comes to numbers, Ashanti region has close to 1 million people, in excess of 900,000 people who are multidimensionally poor. Its multidimensional poverty rate of 18% is third from the bottom. So from a percentage point of view, you see Savannah region having the highest percentage. So you say that Savannah region from a percentage, but look at the population for Savannah region. Indeed, for some of the regions, the number of people who are multidimensionally poor is just about the total number of people who are in those regions. This is very important for government consideration, because the cost of reducing multidimensional poverty in Ashanti region, although it has a rate of 18%, given that in absolute terms it has more people than Savannah region, is going to have more cost implications for Ashanti region than the Savannah region. So from a simple response point of view, in absolute terms, we have Ashanti region having the highest number of people who are multidimensionally poor, but from a percentage point of view, we have the Savannah region having the highest percentage of those who are multidimensionally poor.
I wanted to chip in this, and it's a question that many would want clarity on. There's a part of the report that says the district with the least proportion of its population who are multidimensionally poor is Asokwa Municipal. This is 6.3%. This is in the Ashanti region. And the one with the highest is Nabdam district, 68.6% in the Upper East region. What does this mean?
So this is just pointing to the disparity across the 261 administrative district, and this gives us a sense of the need to look at the intervention from different perspectives. Raymond, for me, what is more concerning is the intra-regional inequalities, which we don't have it as a highlight in this report. But throughout the 2021 population housing census, we highlighted intra-regional inequalities, especially in the case of Ashanti region. With this Asokwa that we see in Ashanti region with a multidimensional poverty rate of 6.3, if you're not careful, would mask the very high proportion of multidimensional poverty in Sexual Afram Plains, which is also in the same Ashanti region. So we are seeing a lot of intra-regional inequalities rather than the national level inequalities, and that is why the regional ministers should be brought into this conversation, and for which reason I said the Ministry of Local Government, Decentralization and Rural Development should be part of this.
Prof, what you're saying is that in Ashanti region, Asokwa appears to be doing well, but there are other areas within Ashanti region where the numbers are terrible.
That's the point.
Okay.
And they are terrible to the extent that in regions like Upper East, Upper West, you find districts in there that are doing better than some districts in Ashanti region.
Okay. So when we say, Ashanti is doing well, it might not reflect the realities on the ground.
Precisely so.
So in effect, you're saying let's go down. Let's just not pick it and say, in the Savannah region is 49%, so that's it, we're going here. But we must begin to break it down and look at areas that are most affected and tackle them.
Winston, we've always emphasized the fact that statistics is not about the aggregates, and emphasize the fact that there are two types of statistics. Statistics for just saying that this is where we are, which we call the statistical output. And the statistical input gives us a sense of what we have to do to ensure that we want to get where we want to get to. If we really want to deal with any issue in this country, it is in the disaggregates. It's never in the aggregates. So the disaggregate could either come from a geographical point of view, you see the distribution, or disaggregate in terms of the issues. So for me, this conversation is not about the 7.3 million people that are multidimensionally poor. But if I look at across the 13 indicators, what numbers am I going to see and how would they vary across the different districts? Because that's the only way you can intervene. You don't intervene from the perspective of the 7.3 million. But how you can intervene is that, is it more of an issue of health insurance? Is it more of an issue of employment? Is it more of an issue of school lag? Because the bulk figure would not say anything to us because it's a bag of 13 indicators. So our conversation really now should be on the 13 indicators and how they vary across the district to enable the policymakers make the right interventions.
There is something I saw that confused me, mindful of popular prejudice. Ashaman within the Greater Accra region, the Ashaman municipality, with a population of 206,000, the number of persons living in multi-dimensionally poor households is 15,000. This is 7.5%, and it's number 2 on the rank of percent of persons living in multi-dimensionally poor households. Does it not conflict with the image we have of Ashaman?
The conflict will come from the benchmark for Ashaman.
Okay.
If you are benchmarking Ashaman with, let's say, Namdam, it's going to give you a different perspective.
I see.
Even within Greater Accra, if you are benchmarking Ashaman with Lejokuku, it's going to give you a different perspective relative to other districts within the same region. So the conflict would always come in terms of, what is our benchmark? Is it a historical benchmark in terms of how Ashaman has evolved over time? Or is it benchmarking Ashaman with other districts? And as I said, why those districts, Namdam would be an outlier. Lejokuku could be a good benchmark for it. Another close by district to Ashaman could be a benchmark for it. So that conflict will really come in depending on what you are using as a benchmark for Ashaman in terms of conflict.
There are those who ask, so if I'm a DCE today, intending to improve conditions within my area, exactly what should I be looking for when I touch this report?
So what we've done is to ensure that we engage. We did a dissemination at all the 16 administrative regions, and the district statisticians across all our 261 administrative districts, we've empowered them, we've built their capacity, and they are doing the same dissemination across all our 261 administrative districts. Raymond, what our expectation is that every district coordinating unit should take its report and ask ourselves, for the top 20 localities, what is the multi-dimensional poverty situation?
Okay.
Don't look at the numbers. Go across the 13 indicators. Ask yourself, in your district, as I said, is it an issue of health insurance? Is it an issue of school lag? And given what has the highest rate of deprivation, the expectation is that you focus on that.
So if I look at this report, I can, within my district, get to know what the biggest problems of the people are, mindful of the benchmark you have provided. Then any form of response can be targeted at these.
Absolutely. That is why we've calculated the multidimensional poverty for the top 20 localities in each of these districts.
Professor Annim, this is a good research and report. You've talked about how in every district you have the top 20 localities, which means this is something that every district assembly must have. Has this report been distributed to the district assemblies?
Yes, we've distributed this report to all the district assemblies. We've gone beyond that and engaged them in person through the district statisticians to ensure that the numbers are interpreted to them to help with their policy interventions.
That's an interesting development. So it's not as if they just have the report and they will claim they don't understand it. But now they've been told what it really means, like we've been having this conversation. So that nobody can give an excuse of not being able to target properly. And for those who do not understand why this is important, you might manage a district, but you may not know every corner of the district and the needs there. Sometimes it's difficult going from home to home asking. So collectively they'll come talk about road and all the other things. But the basic things that are supposed to be done to lift people from poverty, to make sure that they are provided with the basics. So, for example, you want to situate a school, you will know this is the area that has this number of people who are not in school and that they will need to access a school facility because it's very far from them. If you have this information, for most people, if like doing a project, that feasibility study costs a lot. So you don't have to go through all of that. You can get it done immediately. This will not be the first time we have done a multi-indicator study of any sort. But do we use it? It is a question that is on the hearts and minds of many people. Is this something that you think from your engagement with the people, they prioritize? Like even they go to for notes before they decide what to do with their scarce resources?
I mean, let me step back and provide much more information on the question on our engagement with the district units. It was a package of not just disseminating the multidimensional poverty report, but we took advantage and also built their capacity on the use of the Statistical online bank. Raymond, as you know, we have this STAS bank that holds over 350 million indicators. And why we built their capacity on that is we don't want to be very restrictive with the official statistics on multidimensional poverty at the district level. So we've told the district operatives that with the help of the district statisticians, for whatever variable that you think would impact more on multidimensional poverty in your district, you have access to the Statistical online bank, and this is how you can incorporate it into the computation of your understanding of multidimensional poverty to better help you do the targeting that is expected. I keep saying that statistics are being used in the country, but the extent to which we are using it is more or less negligible. And we use it to demonstrate how far we've gone rather than using it to inform what we want to do. And that is why we are trying to change the narrative and say that let's give them the statistics that would help the policymaker put in the right interventions rather than just using it to demonstrate to say that I did well or I did not did well. That is where I think there is some variation from the statistical service point of view and the policy making angle.
Great. So it means that going forward, we can actually hold, all these persons accountable, because they have they have the information in front of them, and they should be putting in place measures to do that. Has any of them, gotten back to you asking for further and better particulars, maybe?
Again, I'll put it this way, that after the national dissemination, we met with the parliamentary subcommittee on local government just last weekend. This is how far we want this report to go. We got a number of them in attendance, and then they thought through how they're going to use it and further expand it to their colleagues on the floor of parliament. But again, it's important to think through how they are using it. And I'm coming back to the use of the word accountable. Winston, going forward, let us not wait till something happens and bring in accountability. The only way we can start looking at issues is when policies are developed, and ask ourselves, why is this particular district focusing on school lag other than school attainment? So this is the time, and I always say that whatever we do around this time
for some of us, lag and attainment, what's the difference?
So as I explained, the lag simply means that you are 2 years behind the expected grade that you have to be in. So you're expected to be in class 6 and now you are in class 3. 4. Or class 4. So it's at least 2 years, so it could be class 3. Then attainment is, as I explained, at age 15, minimum, you are expected to have done 9 years of education. So if we get to you and you are more than you are 15 years and older and you've not done at least 9 years of education, then you are deprived in terms of that attainment of 9 years of schooling. So these are the two definitions. So as I was trying to explain, this is the window that we really need to influence our thinking around the policies that we're going to see in the next 4 years. If we don't influence manifestos around this time with these inputs, and at the end of the 4 years we come back and say that did we achieve what we had to achieve, we would have lost the battle by then. So whatever numbers we're going to see in the manifestos now, whether they are there or not, would be the image that we're going to see of ourselves as a country in the next 4 years. And that is why Ghana Statistical Service is doing whatever possible around this time to put out a lot of information to inform CSOs, the media, the general public on what they should look out for in terms of the interventions that are coming along and whether they align with our current state as a country.
So I was almost, because I've seen the communique from, I don't know, but it's related, right? The conversation about status of poverty and food insecurity measurement. I've seen the communique. There's a bit of a point you make there that the Ministry of Food and Agriculture should set statistical targets for food inflation and food insecurity, which will be pursued by using national metrics in the Planting for Food and Jobs Phase 2. What does it mean?
So as I indicated last week, we had an international convening on poverty and food security. And one of the things that we did had to look at the Planting for Food and Jobs Phase 2 and look at the statistical targets in there. This is related to a point that I made earlier on. If we invest so much in planting for food and jobs, and that translates into increased production, the increased production of food would not necessarily translate into a reduction in food inflation and would not necessarily translate into food security. There's a stark difference between food self-sufficiency and food security, because food security is looked at from different dimensions. It's not just on the supply side, whether food is available, is accessible, but whether they are eating the right kinds of food is the question. Whether they have the food at all times is the question. So the move from food self-sufficiency to food security is something that we need to look at. If you look at the current Planting for Food and Jobs Phase 2, we have a lot of indicators on the food production side, the food self-sufficiency side. So what this communique is trying to do is to avert the minds of the ministry to think through the Planting for Food and Jobs Phase 2 and see how we can incorporate statistical targets from two perspectives. How the food self-sufficiency will translate into a reduction in food inflation, and to what extent. That is what we mean by the statistical target. And how that is going to translate into a reduction in food insecurity. Currently, we've reported a food insecurity figure, and over time, to what extent do we want to see this reduction, given that food production is going up?
Professor Samuel Kwabena Annim, thank you so much for making time to join us this morning. We're very grateful, and continue the good work.
We should have a weekly session on development statistics.
He says the ball is in your court.
We are hoping to that.
And since they both went to Accra Academy at some point in time.
Oh, Prof did too.
Yes, he did. I think he did a safe form, right?
Yes.
But Accra people are claiming.
Yeah, no, it's like that.